Hi there, folks. I'm Captain JLS, and this is the long overdue, not as long overdue as the last Robotech video, but long overdue second episode of TurboSaga 2020 AD. So, in the couple months since the first episode, a lot's happened, and we're going to talk about that first. So, the release date of the TurboGrafx-16 Mini came and went, and the console did not come out. It was supposed to be out March 19th, and as somebody noted in the comments of the last TurboGrafx video, the pre-orders closed up early. And then, as I pointed out, a couple of weeks later, they reopened. But the release date for the TurboGrafx-16 Mini on Amazon got moved to the last day of 2020. Now, I'd speculated that that is a placeholder date, but right now, Amazon is acting like that is the date. They've even actually locked in expected delivery date. According to the email I got from them, expected delivery date January 5th, 2021. Now remember that the pre-orders originally opened in, I think it was July of 2019, so that will be a full year and a half since the pre-orders went up that US gamers will actually get their TurboGrafx-16 Minis. That said, Amazon Japan had TurboGrafx-16 Minis for a while. I, in fact, got into my old Amazon.co.jp account yesterday. This is being recorded in the really early AM hours on Monday. I got into that account yesterday and was all set to order one, and lo and behold, between the last time I looked and getting my account opened back up, it was now being only sold by third-party sellers for like $500 a pop. And I don't want one that bad. Not enough to just, blow the whole month's rent on it. No siree, Bob. Now, they do still have the PC Engine Minis and the intended for European audiences core graphics available. For, I think it's like 11,000 yen, which translates to about 105, 110 bucks. So, I mean, that's certainly an option if you are in the market right now for something that plays these games. Considering I have an Amazon Japan account, you can open one up as an English-speaking person, as a person who only has a U.S. address, a U.S. credit card, and all that. They don't really care. You just will have to use Google Translate, copy and text all the text, or just use Chrome, I think. Although sometimes I know with some websites, I don't know about Amazon Japan, but I know with some websites, Chrome's built-in translation, kind of janks up some of the functionality. So, beware if that's the route you're taking. I just was using Safari on my Mac and, copy-pasted all the text to find my way around getting back into that account because I forgot the password. Anyway, so that's kind of where things are on the PC Engine Turbo front right now, which for me means, while there are plenty of people out there who are, putting up reviews. I know I read a review at Bleeding Cool. I know I read a review at EGM, and both of those reviewers were kind of like, oh, I guess they're going to be shipping it soon. Well, not by the email they sent me, but, if that's what they're saying, hey, I'll take it sooner rather than later, absolutely. But, I know people have reviews of the PC Engine Mini out, but, I intended on taking this little journey here through the library on the system before launch, and by golly, by gum, I'm going to finish it with the resources at hand, which meant, finishing out the games that I actually have. Well, I also dug around on the internet and zapped myself some copies of a couple of games, and the the machine, the actual TurboGrafx didn't like those games, but I still managed to get some footage. So I've done some editing here and some used a little video editing magic to get the audio to sound right. But yeah, so I got to play a little bit of Star Parodier. I got to play a little bit of Rondo of Blood actually on my TurboGrafx, and I got the intro for Tengai Makyo 2 to run, as well as Panic Bomber. I got a lot of Panic Bomber played, and I kind of like that, and I'll be quite happy to actually have that to play once the mini system actually launches here in the West. Anyway, enough blathering. Let's get on to the back half of the catalog, and then at the end, I've got some further notes to make.
Chu-Man Fu, titled B-Ball in its original Japanese release, is an action puzzle maze game reminiscent of the same publisher's Bomberman. Not sure why Konami chose the American version, with the name that's an obvious riff on the supervillain of Sax Rohmer's xenophobic early to mid-20th century action thrillers on all versions of their mini-console worldwide. Seems an odd choice in 2020. You play a little Chinese girl kicking colored orbs around a maze. The goal is to push the orb onto a matching colored tile. Match all the orbs to the tiles, and you move on to the next stage. You can also kick the orbs around the field to crush the monsters in the maze. 2 players can play simultaneously. I don't exactly get this mixed up with the similar Crater Maze, but that and the cutesy Namco shooter Ordyne are for some reason forever linked to Chu-Man Fu in my memories. I think they had to have been released for the Turbo around the same time and have a similar charming, cute aesthetic, though Chu-Man Fu has a second-gen style box without the black frame around the game art. Looking at release dates, there's a fuzzy area during spring 1990 where the 2 styles coexisted. The second and final SuperGrafx game on the Turbo and PC Engine Mini, and that's 2 out of 6 on the Mini, a whole third of the library. Aldines is a side-scrolling shooter set in this very year, 2020, and given the way the year's gone, a massive alien invasion doesn't seem so outlandish. It's typical single space fighter versus world-crushing alien forces fare. The limited colors make it seem a bit dull at first, but the massive biomechanical monstrosities you're pitted against, and interesting use of the option craft that follow your space fighter around, they have several different behaviors that the player can select from, make it stand out a bit from the rest of the pack. Compile, the shooter specialists who gave us blazing lasers, return with a magnificent vertical shooter on CD-ROM that we were denied here in the States.
我が声に耳を傾けし風の精霊よ、我が機体の翼となりて重力の戒めより解き放ちたまえ。
精霊の連時計最高値へいつでも発信できるわ。
スプリガン出ます。
Set in a technologically advanced fantasy world where you're taking down airships, wizards, and flying metal skulls with your magically powered armored suit, Spriggan is considered one of the highlights of the PC Engine's massive shooter library. And hey, check it out, more colored orbs! Here they're the basis for the power-up system. You can collect up to 3 at a time, and depending on the color combination, you get different weapon systems. My preference is a combination of yellow and green, which gives you concentrated standard twin fire, along with a green wave attack that fires backwards a bit before striking most everything on the screen ahead of you. Like blazing lasers before it, the difficulty ramps up slowly, but the game gets pretty rough as you go on. The real advantage of the CD-ROM format here is that you get rad cutscenes like the one you saw at the outset, and one of those tremendous early 90s PC Engine CD-ROM game scores. The much more honed and refined second Bonk game, and for my money the best in the series across all platforms. Bonk's Revenge, and yes, all territories got the US version, which censors a powered-up form that throws kisses at the bad guys, is a much more colorful, cohesive adventure than the first game, giving the player a sense of traversing a side-scrolling world, where the first game's eggshell-headed villains are just running around doing stuff when Bonk charges in to bash them with his giant noggin. In just the first few stages, you'll catch them napping, fishing, and mining. I love that. The new, cuter Bonk character sprite becomes standard for all games going forward, and I do prefer this one. Bonus games are still sprinkled around the world, and they do include some new ones. The invincible power-up form here now has a weird fire-breathing butt head that reminds me of Gary Oldman's hairstyle as creepy old Dracula. And occasionally, Bonk can find a flower that allows him to fly. It has the best use of the smiley faces Bonk collects in the entire series. At the end of each stage, Bonk cashes them in to ride an elevator up to a power-up filled train. The more you collect, the more luxurious the train, and the more and better power-ups you get. I do miss the brainwashed bosses conceit of the first game. The second game's bosses are therefore a little less memorable. That minor point is really my one complaint about this one. It's one of the great games of the console, and should be at the top of your 2 playlist. Unless you feel like saving one of the best for last. Provided in both Japanese and English on the mini consoles, and I think this is the last game like that, Neutopia 2 is a subtle refinement of the first game. The original Neutopia's hero, Giusetta, appears to his wife in a dream, fighting and losing to a terrible monster. She sends their son out into the world to follow in his footsteps and save Neutopia once again. What follows are more Legend of Zelda-like adventures across a variety of terrains and through a new series of dark dungeons. This time, instead of magic jewels, the dungeons end in acquiring items for a series of story-driven fetch quests. There are actual villages this time, rather than folks just hiding in caves and under trees. Giusetta's son acquires new weapons, like lightning and boomerangs, so you're not just using the fire wand all the time. The biggest refinement is that you can move and attack with the sword diagonally, which really would have helped in the first one. The English version was a late 1992 release and is a bit expensive these days, generally at least $120 for just the Who card. So it's nice to have it here where it can finally reach a semi-wide audience. The second sequel to Taito's classic arcade game Bubble Bobble, Parasol Stars, was published in the US by Working Designs, and that's the version we find on the Mini. This was the first of many, many games they'd bring west until their closure in 2005, and the first of 6 specifically for the TurboGrafx. More about them in a few minutes. This is, like its predecessors, a cute arcade-style action game, though this is a PC Engine TurboGrafx original, not an arcade port. Other platforms did get this game. Those are all based on this version. Parasol Stars plays much more like the original game than Rainbow Islands did. This time around, Bubby and Bobby, the heroes from the first 2 games, still free of the curse that made them dragons in Bubble Bobble, have umbrellas that they swing at enemies to stun them. They can then use the umbrella to scoop up the stunned enemies and throw them at other enemies. Like the first game, this does have 2-player simultaneous gameplay. Rainbow Islands featured alternating 2-player play. stages are completed again, as in Bubble Bobble, when all enemies are defeated. At the end of each world, there's a boss fight, and when you reach the second world, the stages break out of the Bubble Bobble like single-screen mold. It's a joyful, colorful exemplar of a particular flavor of early 90s action platform game, and a great addition to the Minis library. A Japan-only, rock-solid conversion of Konami's flagship shooter, which was at that point a 6-year-old game. And compared to many of the shooters we've seen at this point, it does feel a bit stripped down, with its simple backgrounds and repeating end-of-stage bosses. That doesn't take anything away from its classic status, or the fact that at this point it was the best home conversion the game had ever had. But Salamander, the first Gradius sequel, would ship a PC Engine conversion literally a month later. Working Designs provides another American release of a Taito arcade game for the TurboGrafx, and this time it's the side-scrolling action RPG hybrid Kadash. I played a lot of the coin-op original in the early 1990s, when the Konami 4-player brawlers and the Street Fighter II machines were all occupied. The Kadash machine I played was at the second arcade at North Park Mall in Joplin, Missouri, right by what was then a Venture department store. That arcade did not have a second machine, which meant Joplin players were denied a 4-adventurer party. Yes, Kadash in the arcade could support up to 4 players with 2 arcade machines linked side by side. Kadash was ported to both the Turbo and the Sega Genesis, and while the Genesis version looks a bit more the part and might be a bit closer in stage design to the original, the colors on the TurboGrafx version are brighter, and it retains all 4 character classes from the arcade. The Genesis version is missing the Priest with her awesome flail, and the shuriken-flinging ninja. Also, I'm pretty sure the TurboGrafx port's music is a closer match for the arcade. Admittedly, Kadash is a sort of clunky hack-and-slash game, livened up largely by the RPG mechanics, but I'm a sucker for this particular hybrid genre. See also the Wonder Boy/Monster World games, and there's a particular atmosphere and style about it that I've always enjoyed. Now, Working Designs has a reputation for punching up their English scripts with pop culture gags, and I didn't think they did it here until I got to about the halfway point during this playthrough and went, that probably wasn't in the original script. And then I actually beat the game the day after recording this footage and ran into references to the late astronomer Carl Sagan, and in an amusing bit of renewed relevance, Dr. Dolittle. More gags like these would plague their translation of Telenet Japan's Cosmic Fantasy II, which, like the rest of Telenet's vast PC Engine/TurboGrafx library, is much missed on the mini consoles. Did someone just not bring up current rights holder Sunsoft about those games? The aforementioned first sequel to Gradius, a Japan-only release based on the arcade game that Western gamers might remember as Life Force. For some bizarre reason, Salamander was tapped to skip the PC Engine Mini to make up for the fact that the TurboGrafx and CoreGrafx Minis are missing Far East of Eden 2 and Tokimeki Memorial. In this outing, the Vic Viper loses the classic Gradius power-up system, flips to a vertical shooting orientation every other stage, and faces a wider variety of threats than it did in the first game, starting with a super gross charge through some kind of giant alien life form, hence the Western title. Here we reach the first of several games included on all versions of the mini console that is genuinely incomprehensible without serious Japanese language skills. Super Momotaro Dentetsu is a game built around a pun. Densetsu, or legend, is one syllable off from Dentetsu, or electric train. This series takes Momotaro, the boy hero of Japanese legend born from a giant peach, about whom Hudson had made a series of role-playing games, and moves him onto a train, the kind you might get on to move about in a modern city, and pits him in a money-making, property-buying contest a la Monopoly. It's literally a board game with dice rolling and random events drawn by virtual card. This is the third game in the series and the second and final for the PC Engine. The series remains popular enough in Japan that a new game is coming out for the Switch this winter. A trailer came out for it a month ago, which I think should be enough to explain its presence here. Tecmo's late 1980s Nintendo 8-bit classic Ninja Ryukenden, better known in the US as Ninja Gaiden, received a fantastic port to the PC Engine in 1991, and finally, in 2020, we're all given the opportunity officially to play it. What's really frustrating is that the game, as is, has a code to change all the dialogue in those famous cutscenes that tell the story of young ninja Ryu Hayabusa investigating his father's disappearance and running afoul of a conspiracy involving the CIA fighting a cult that seeks to resurrect an ancient demon into English. It's right there on the cart. And by 1991, Nintendo's stranglehold on their third-party publishers, which had prevented these companies from releasing games in the US on competing game consoles, had weakened. This was the year that Sunsoft finally was allowed to release Batman for the Sega Genesis. And in fact, a Ninja Gaiden game made its way to the Game Gear, of all things, in the US that same year. Its absence from the US TurboGrafx remains a mystery. In any case, the game plays just like the NES original, looks the part of a proper upgrade, and the only real downside to it is that the music is almost entirely different. Not bad, like the later Super Nintendo port's off-puttingly weird rearrangements, just different, though I can definitely understand if the change throws you off. Where the Ninja Gaiden thing has me confused, this one has me frustrated. Tengai Makyo, or Far East of Eden, is the big PC Engine CD-ROM role-playing game series we never got in the West. The first RPG series to take advantage of doing fancy animated cutscenes and heavy amounts of voiced dialogue. Set in a fictionalized version of historical Japan called Jipang, after the old Italian name for the country, it's a sometimes offbeat series that mashes Western misconceptions of the country with myths and legends to silly effect. Manjimaru here is the most beloved game in the series by fans, and like so many games, was apparently supposed to drop for the TurboGrafx back in the 1990s, but the market for the system cratered before that could happen. Given when that would have happened, that could have been for the best. Most of the English-spoken dialogue in Turbo games that aren't from Working Designs and aren't East Books 1 and 2 is pretty rough. The thing that drives me up a wall is that this is one of the two games that are exclusive to the Japanese PC Engine Mini. Now I wondered why this might be, but the answer could well be in some of the images you've just seen. That the title character's name features the character Manji, like the guy from Blade of the Immortal, same symbol that appears on the back of that guy's gi, which looks like a swastika turned the opposite direction. I could definitely see Konami making the call that putting a game with that on the title screen out in North America and Europe might be a bad idea. Still, this would have been an excellent opportunity to, say, translate this game and get more eyes on it outside of Japan, especially in a year when series creator Oji Hiroi's other big video game series, Sakura Wars, is getting a high-profile sequel. Two more quick tidbits. This is the first game on the Mini that, on the actual console, required the Super System card, which gives the PC Engine or TurboGrafx additional RAM, allowing it to store more data off of the CD-ROM at once, reducing loading wait times. The Duo, an all-in-one system with the CD drive built in, released in Japan in 91 and the States in 92, also had this upgrade built in. As far as this game series goes, the only Far East of Eden game to be released in the West was Kabuki Clash, a 1995 fighting game for the SNK Neo Geo.
가자! 오가리!
만지마루 はいるか今日という今日は許さねえぞ
만지마루?
時空新世紀4622年人類とマザーブレイン軍との戦いはとなった
Another game we missed out on in the West, and apparently only by a hair. A completed US version called Fantasy Star Soldier has been floating around out there for a while. In the same way that Konami created Parodius, a cute parody version of Gradius that is nonetheless just as brutal as the serious game, Hudson and Kaneko created this parody game, which plays just like the other Hudson vertical shooters, Blazing Lasers, the Star Soldier series. Easy to pick up and play, but increasingly nerve-wracking as you go. The other similarity between Parodius and this is that Star Parodier features characters from other Hudson properties, most notably, of course, Bomberman, who is one of your playable characters. I love that in this opening animation, the Bomberman mech launches from a catapult platform like a Gundam, while you'll see the PC Engine ship is launched from a crane like a Valkyrie in the Macross movie Do You Remember Love. Spaceship shooters weren't the only thing they were riffing on here. In any case, it's another fun shooter on a mini console full of fun shooters. Does have me wondering why we don't also have the great PC Engine port of Parodius, but maybe they thought between this and Airzoc they had enough goofy shooters? While this shares with the original Spriggan, a developer, compile, a cutscene and dialogue-heavy nature, far more so than the first game actually, reminds me a lot of the character chatter in Messiah's Assault Suits games, and the player craft being a giant robot, Spriggan Mark II flips to horizontal scrolling and has a more standard sci-fi theme. I've not gotten to play this one, but the soundtrack rocks. It's gorgeous to look at. And you know, I've never heard of a bad compile shooter. Hudson's premier run-and-jump action series, a mutation of Sega and Wesstone's original Wonder Boy game from the arcades, makes its sole appearance on the Hudson NEC hardware. Cuter, with fewer gradient-heavy graphics than the same year's Super Adventure Island for the Super Nintendo, this is very much an if it ain't broke take on the gameplay of the original game. More visually appealing, but less interesting gameplay-wise than the earlier and extremely similar JJ and Jeff. There's running, there's jumping, there's fruit collecting, and there's throwing weapons at monsters. It's arcade-style, no-looking-back platforming distilled to its essence, and I don't know about you, but sure, sometimes I want that, and this is an exemplary take on that style of game. Much as we did in the West in the TurboGrafx library, the mini-console skips 1991's inaptly named Final Soldier and moves right on to 1992's Soldier Blade, which marries the gameplay of the earlier Star Soldier games with a power-up system that seems reminiscent of the first Spriggan game, with your weapon loadout being determined by the combination of 3 boldly colored power-up items. Again, as I said when talking about Super Star Soldier, the TurboGrafx cart for this costs more than the mini unit, so I'm not going to complain about its presence here, even if it doesn't do anything innovative with the genre. It's Metal Gear and Death Stranding creator Hideo Kojima's classic graphic adventure riff on Blade Runner and the Terminator, one of Konami's 2 legendary early 90s PC Engine releases, which previously only saw release in the West on the Sega CD. Unfortunately, the only version on the mini consoles worldwide is in Japanese only. You would think Konami could hire someone to, if not create a new translation, at least marry the Sega CD translation to the PC Engine version and make that a selling point for the TurboGrafx Mini. But alas, no such luck. Amusingly, this is one of 2 PC Engine/TurboGrafx games we're looking at today that got a US and Europe only Sega CD port. I've owned this copy of Snatcher that we're watching for something like 15 years. After beating Ys 4 without an English translation, I got cocky and thought I could do something with this. I was wrong. I got through this super rad introductory sequence, which I'd seen screenshots of forever in video game magazines. And then, as you'll see in a bit, we're going to watch a fair bit of this intro because it is super rad, though I have trimmed it a little. I got to the first interactive sequence and flailed. Of course, today, if you want to just lay eyes on the whole thing, I'm dead certain there's a long play you could watch. But, you know, if someone had bothered to give us an English translation, that would be a little less necessary.
ギリアンシード推定31歳3年前妻のジェミーシードと共にシベリア州立領土より第本日付でジャンカーに任命されてきたギリアンシードだが、
ギリアンシードさん、どうも失礼しました。私はジャンカー本部のインフォメーション兼オペレーターをしていますミカ・スレイトンです。よろしく。
Like Alien Crush and Blazing Lasers, this game is a reason all on its own to grab one of these mini consoles if you don't already otherwise have access to it. Airzonk, which for a while was tentatively titled Bonk's Thunder Shooting, is a magnificent, joyously goofy horizontal shooter with one of my favorite non-CD TurboGrafx soundtracks. Bonk's cyborg descendant here crosses the character with Astro Boy, then slaps some shades on him and sticks a lightning bolt on his forehead. He might be most familiar to folks who, like I did, read video game magazines like they were Holy Writ in the early 90s, as the mascot for the Turbo Systems in 1992 and 93. His game is almost the perfect expression of the system's identity. It just makes sense for this system to have a mascot shoot 'em up. It also makes sense for a system that was at the time trying to reinvent itself in the US marketplace to take its caveman mascot and turn him into a sunglasses-wearing cyborg. The game itself plays like a dream and features a glorious arsenal of wild power-ups, all of which have explosive charged versions, as well as a charming partner system where Zonk can choose a friend to appear as a missile-firing tag-along when you acquire a giant smiley face icon. Grabbing a second one of these icons merges Zonk with his pal, which makes you invincible and provides a weapon unique to that form. Both Bonk and Zonk each have one more game on the system, but just as Bonk 3 doesn't top Bonk's Revenge, Super Air Zonk doesn't top the original. For a survey of the system like the Mini provides, this is a reasonable place to stop. A PC Engine CD-ROM port of the third installment of Konami's classic horizontal shooter series. While it starts, as is 90s CD-ROM law, with a nifty intro sequence showcasing the Vic Viper's weapon systems, it's otherwise just a polished port of the arcade game. Salamander's vertical stages are tossed into the dustbin of history, but its weapon variants are offered as part of the new selectable loadouts at the beginning of the game. Even here in 2020, the first stage, which has the Vic Viper dodging fire serpents among a field of blazing mini-suns, impresses. The game is hard as hell, but generally fair unless you reach one of those bits where you genuinely need a bunch of power-ups proceed, and then die, costing you the lot of them. I really like the way Konami decided to use the CD audio for this game, not to offer a live instrumental take on the soundtrack, but to provide the player a CD recording of the actual arcade tunes. Clever. I'd call this and the other Gradius games unusual picks for the mini consoles, if not for Konami absorbing Hudson over a decade ago. But this one in particular is a perfect choice. I will again, though, ask, come on, Konami, no Parodius? Really? The first installment of Messiah's series of legendarily weird side-scrolling shooters. If you're familiar with these games at all, it's probably from pictures of these unsettlingly ripped, mostly naked, grinning bodybuilder types. There are games where you do play as those dudes. In this first installment of the series, though, they just serve as support ships. The player characters are green-haired, teenage-looking flying Esper kids, navigating a bizarre, grotesque, post-apocalyptic world by way of a steampunk fan's LSD trip. The music is haunting, with a lot of bizarre chanting, and the enemy design features a lot of things with human torsos and arms that shouldn't have human torsos and arms. Its inclusion here, at least on the US unit, feels like Konami going, "We are so sorry TTI did not have the guts to give this bonkers game to you in 1992. Please accept this with our apologies."
In der guten alten Zeit lebten die Menschen noch ruhig und in Frieden. Niemand glaubte, dass es in Zukunft zu einer Bedrohung kommen würde. Auf der Schattenseite des Friedens und des Wachstums gab und gibt es aber auch immer das Böse. Die Menschen beginnen, das Wachstum abzulehnen und bezeichnen den Frieden als Degeneration. Wir haben uns hier versammelt, um die Mächte der Finsternis mit unserem verfluchten Blut zu rufen. Wir wollen, dass sie die Welt regieren. Wir erwarten lächelnd den Niedergang der Welt. Nach 100 Jahren ist der Böse wieder auferstanden. Er kann sich in eine Fledermaus, einen Wolf und Nebel verwandeln. Er liebt die Nacht. Er schlürft das Blut von jungen Frauen und lebt ewig. Der Burgherr des Teufelsschlosses, der Herr des Bösen, Graf Dracula ist auferstanden.
If not for the fact that Konami released an English-language version of this for the PlayStation 4 in October 2018, this would be the big one, the thing that justifies buying a mini console altogether. For those of you without a PlayStation 4, perhaps this at least tips you over the edge. Castlevania: Rondo of Blood was a major turning point in one of the all-time great console video game franchises, and it did not receive a US release until 2007, when the PC Engine version was provided as an unlockable in the Sony PlayStation Portable's 3D graphics remake of the game. It didn't make it to a non-portable in the West until its 2018 release for Sony's current flagship console. Set 100 years after the original 1986 game, Rondo presents us with Simon Belmont's descendant Richter, who pursues his beloved's captor, a servant of Count Dracula, to the series' recurring foe's castle. The game plays like the original Castlevania and its second sequel, Dracula's Curse, only honed to the finest edge. The pointless whip power-ups are discarded, the pseudo-realistically clunky Belmont jump has a little more grace, but still has that weight and arc about it that reminds you what series you're playing. This is the first Castlevania where you can jump on and off of stairs, which is handy. It's also the first Castlevania where if you grab a sub-weapon you hate, you're given the option to grab the previous sub-weapon back. Of course, this game's sequel would require a whole new set of mechanics, because, no offense to Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis, which would come out a year later, this is those mechanics at their peak. And its sense of exploration, afforded by the ability to save your progress and return to any stage you previously conquered to root out any secrets that you've missed, would be given more natural expression in its sequel, Symphony of the Night, for the PlayStation as well. But, for Western gamers, this is the missing link between Dracula's Curse's non-linearity and Symphony of the Night's full-on, go anywhere you like, so long as you have the equipment and powers that let you single, interconnected map. Certainly this game no longer has the mystique it had when it was nigh to unobtainable for English-speaking fans in the mid to late 90s, especially after the glut of Castlevania games built on its sequel's bones for the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS all through the 2000s. At this point, if you want an anime-inspired 2D Castlevania with a bunch of unlockable secrets, you're spoiled for choice. But its odd place in history, the true successor of the 80s Nintendo series' legacy, and precursor to Symphony of the Night's Sony PlayStation era glory, missing from its own time in the West, makes it something anyone who has a fondness for any of those games around it should seek out, if they haven't by now. It's just a shame that, again, like Snatcher, this is a game for which an English version exists, but it's just not included on Konami's Hudson/NEC mini consoles. Mercifully, unlike Snatcher, while you lose a certain amount of context being unable to understand the dialogue, the game can still be played easily enough. You just have to trial and error the menus a bit. There were 3 proper Bomberman games for the PC Engine. This is one of Hudson's big flagship properties, so that shouldn't be surprising. The one you're watching right now, not one of the two on the mini console. All I have is the first one, which was hidden on the 3-in-1 game CD sold with the Super System card. That said, it at least gets the idea of Bomberman across for those of you who might be unfamiliar. Bomb-headed guy walks around maze, blows up blocks, blows up baddies, and when he's cleared the stage of baddies, moves on to the next stage. This is basically how Bomberman 93 works in a nutshell. There's also a multiplayer mode where you and your friends can wander around the stages blowing each other up. That's what I think Bomberman is famed for in most circles anymore. And with a turbo tap and some extra controllers, that's definitely something you can do on the Mini. Bomberman 94 does change up the formula. 93 is like a refinement of this first game, but 94 changes up its single-player campaign, turning it into a quest to acquire pieces of a magic amulet instead of blowing up all of the enemies. It also gives you kangaroo-like Louis to ride, which gives the player new abilities, and, most importantly, a ton of unique maps and character skins for multiplayer mayhem. While the Super Nintendo Bombermans would carry over some of the multiplayer changes, you wouldn't see a similar single-player mode shake-up until the Saturn and PlayStation releases. Also worth noting, 93 is the US version of the game, but because TTI imploded in 1994, 94 never came out in the States, so that is the Japanese release. Just as Naxat and Compile gave us two sort of unrelated Spriggan shooters, Hudson and Red gave us two almost totally unrelated Of Thunder shooters, though they're at least both horizontal shooters with awesome metal soundtracks. Alas, Gate of Thunder, the traditionally sci-fi themed first of the two, is bizarrely absent from the mini consoles. Lords of Thunder, though, originally released in Japan as Winds of Thunder, is here in all its frustrating fantasy-themed glory. As tends to happen, you've got 6 evil overlords with giant shoulder pads looking to resurrect a dark god. Your awesome hero in his magically enchanted armor, you can actually choose from 4 elemental armors, flies into action to stop them. Pick which of the first 6 stages you want to give a whirl, pick an armor, and off you go. But don't be surprised if you get clobbered during the first go-round. Alas, while our hero has a power bar, it starts short, and he has but 1 life, 3 continues, and minimal knockback invincibility. Your gems persist across continues, so it's easy enough to load up with power-ups at the shop to hit him harder on the second try. My personal experience with this game is that, despite lusting after it for years and years, I actually first played the Sega CD port at a friend's house in college. I was antisocially obsessing over this for, I don't know, an hour instead of hanging out with anybody, though it's possible that this was the wee AM hours and most everyone else was asleep. Then, a little over a decade or so later, I finally bought a copy of the TurboGrafx original on eBay, and was baffled that I was having so much trouble with it. I think I cleared most of it during that one night in 2003 or whatever. Maybe the Sega CD version is just easier, I don't know. I personally prefer Gate of Thunder, but I can appreciate that Lords of Thunder gives you something a little different, which I presume was the tipping point in regards to it making the cut. It does also have some amazing box art from Ghost in the Shell creator Masamune Shiro, which on the US release is inelegantly obscured by that badly anti-aliased logo, which primarily seems designed to cover up the naked sprites flying around our hero, which aren't covered up on this cover of TTI's own magazine. Tokimeki Memorial, the first installment of Konami's long-running popular high school dating sim series, and the second of the two games only on the Japanese PC Engine mini release. Someone's going to have to explain this absence to me, because I'd say this and Snatcher have an equal amount of unplayability to a non-Japanese speaker/reader. But we still get a copy of Snatcher with its violence and naked lady breasts over here. And just like Far East of Eden, this is a big franchise for Konami that's never been localized over here. Maybe they're just gun-shy about showcasing a major franchise of theirs that's all about dating high school girls here in the English-speaking world, even on as niche an item as the TurboGrafx Mini. Still, if you want to fumble your way through this important piece of Konami history, best hop to eBay or start up an Amazon.co.jp account. Toot sweet. Starting with Tokimeki Memorial, we've arrived in the post-TTI era. None of these last three games arrived in the US because the TurboGrafx-16 and Turbo Duo were dead as of early 1994. Not long after Bomberman 94 was released in Japan, and definitely before Tokimeki hit stores. In Japan, releases start slowing down midway through 1995, about half a year into the Sony PlayStation versus Sega Saturn console generation. Late in the same Christmas season those machines were released, Japanese gamers in need of a puzzle fix could have turned to this Bomberman-themed falling block game, which also appeared on the SNK Neo Geo. With the exception of a challenge mode, this is a head-to-head puzzle game, which made it great for the arcade environment that was the Neo Geo's usual home. The one-player mode pits Bomberman against a series of weird, frequently cute creature challenges. Thing is, I never quite figured out how the game works when I gave it a spin. What I didn't get is that when you match the different colored Bomberman heads, matching at least 3 makes them pop away, a bomb pops up at the bottom of your screen. The actual goal of the game is detonating as many of these bombs as possible in one go, generally by setting them off with the red bomb, making sure of course that one of your bombs is in the red bomb's blast radius, something I screwed up a few times in my 15 or so minutes of play. Despite not understanding the basic mechanics as I was going, I had fun with this, and the falling block puzzle game is a major late 80s, early 90s genre that's otherwise unrepresented in the Minis library. As TTI was winding down operations in the States, NEC and Hudson released one last system card update in Japan. In March of 1994, Japanese gamers could grab the arcade card, which further increased the PC Engine's RAM by 2 megabytes, which apparently was enough oomph to allow a humble 7-year-old game system with an 8-bit CPU to play reasonable CD-ROM ports of Neo Geo hits like World Heroes 2 and Art of Fighting, which even included an attempt at the Neo Geo's scaling effect. Indeed, 4 out of the 12 arcade card games are Neo Geo ports, with a 5th being a Far East of Eden fighting game that I'm pretty sure is different from the one on the Neo Geo. Of the rest of the arcade card games, Sapphire was probably the best choice to toss onto the mini consoles. It's a visually stunning, then state-of-the-art vertical spaceship shooter, the only one to require this card, about an all-female police unit battling baddies across time, with character designs by Galaxy Fraulein Yuna's Mika Akitaka. Lots of pre-rendered mid-90s 3D CGI, and how did they do this on the PC Engine scaling effects? It's fancy, it looks like fun, and it's a rare enough game that it feels like Konami is doing us all a favor, putting it on the mini consoles worldwide.
So, I have more than a few closing thoughts to remark in the wake of all that. For starters, since recording all of that voiceover and editing all of that footage, I spent a lot of the weekend just playing some of these games over again, and some other games that didn't make the cut, and yeah, have just got me bewildered as to why they're not in it. Now, mind you, here's one game that I know exactly why it wasn't on there. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition for the PC Engine. Yes, this is my PC Engine. I dug this out of a box a few weeks ago, not to play Street Fighter, but I have played Street Fighter since then. And no, I'll be talking about the game that I dug this out for in a minute. But Street Fighter, of course, ideally requires a 6-button controller. I have 2 6-button controllers for my PC Engine. Konami has not provided 6-button controllers for the PC Engine, so no Street Fighter. Nobody wants to play Street Fighter with a 2-button controller. Ugh, no, bad times. Bad times. But, so I dug this out, basically to play. Yes, I'm going to make this point again. Parodius. Don't get it. Don't get it! Doesn't make any sense. No, we'll be returning to that sometime later on down the road. I do need to buy an AV booster. Right now, I'm playing that off of RF cable. Funny thing about a Japanese console hooked up to an American TV, if you have an RF cable, you have to actually set the TV to like channel. They have it set to channel 95 in order to get that to work. So played that. I've also been playing. Since editing the footage, I wound up playing all of Bonk's Revenge, which only further cemented my opinion that this is the best of the Bonk games. And in digging around on the internet to get some questions answered and make sure I wasn't talking completely on my butt, I did find out that Bonk 3 was made by other people. Was not made by the same folks who made Bonk's Adventure and Bonk's Revenge, which explains why it feels different, and it would explain why the game world doesn't feel right. Why, a lot of the musical cues are different. Yeah, that game just feels off somehow. I wouldn't, of course, have complained having another game. But I think if you're presenting the library to folks who might not have encountered it in the past, this is a good place to stop. So, I was talking about Lords of Thunder, and how it's a kind of a pain-in-the-butt game. Here is Lords of Thunder. And so I gave it another spin, and I think I did about as well as I had done that day in. Now that I think about it, it might have been 2002. But that day over at that friend's house. But that last stage... So, you'll remember, in Lords of Thunder you can choose from any of these stages, but the thing is, based on the bonus you get at the end, and just the actual difficulty of the stages. This isn't like Mega Man, where, all the stages are sort of the same level of hard. No, this is just, they gave you level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they just let you pick level 6 if you really want to. But no, don't do that. Level 6 is a pain in the ass. It's horrible. It just keeps throwing things at you, and there are certain patterns that you really need to memorize in order to get any progress. And it just underscores the problem with, having your dude flying around with a life bar, barely any knockback invincibility. The only cue that you've been hit is he goes, oof! And, there's stuff flying around all around, and you can barely tell that your guy's flickering. There are things flickering on the screen all over the place because there's just so much stuff on the screen. This game is just kind of a pain. And again, I bet you anything the reason why it's on the mini console is because it is something different. There are plenty of spaceship shooters on the mini console. There are not as many, guy flying around shooters. There's a couple of mech shooters, but it's a fantasy guy flying around in an armor. The other thing, though, the other thought I had, though, was, this was on the Sega CD. That, again, is where I first encountered it. And while the Sega CD did not have a very large installed user base, that's still more people who would have played this in the US than played Gate of Thunder, which I also sat down and played after complaining that it's not on the mini consoles. And again, like Parodius here and Gate of Thunder, I'm not complaining about this for me. I have these games. I can play Gate of Thunder whenever I want. I'm complaining because Gate of Thunder is awesome, and more people should have the opportunity to legally play it. The sorts of people who wouldn't, sit there and download things and put together Raspberry Pis and fire up emulators and all that sort of jazz. Gate of Thunder is awesome and should be played by more people. It's great. I will be complaining about this more later. Other things that we don't get on the mini console. I didn't actually play this today. Cosmic Fantasy 2. It's weird. Aside from Tengai Makyo 2, there are no traditional turn-based RPGs on any of the mini consoles. So no Cosmic Fantasy 2. And this, I think, is because it's a Telenet game. There are none of the games made by Telenet are on the mini consoles. And as I said, did they just not ring up Sunsoft? Because Sunsoft is the current rights holder for the Telenet library. So no Cosmic Fantasy 2, no Valis games, no Exile. That really is most of the Working Designs. Working Designs only put out 6 games. I always thought there were more. Certainly there were more that they were working on, but it's just the 2 Taito games, the 2 Exile games, which I don't have Wicked Phenomenon, Cosmic Fantasy 2, and a game we'll be getting to in a second here. But not until after I bring up Dragon Slayer, The Legend of Heroes. Yes, it's one of the Legend of Heroes games. This actually got a release through TTI, and it's just sort of it's fine. It's a pretty bog standard, turn-based RPG with, slightly too many things on the screen at once. Too much presentation going on and not enough, room for the actual gameplay. But it would have been one of these kinds of games they could put out in English on the mini console. Tengai Makyo is the only traditional turn-based RPG on the machine, and in Japan, of course, there were tons of RPGs for the PC Engine, but either they just didn't want to put this game out because it's the one that's in English, or they just didn't want to continue to flood the thing with games that you couldn't play in a large swath of the territory that these machines are coming out in. No, I'm not sure. And then, of course, there is that last Working Designs game I brought up, which is Bastille, which I just played a bit of earlier tonight. The reason I am recording this at 1 in the morning is because I got way too deep into the first stage of Bastille, which I have not played, I think, in like 15 years. This is a military strategy game with like an overhead action combat screen when you actually encounter the enemy units, and the units are all mecha. It's all robots, But the reason this is a double CD thing is because it contains a map on the one side and a manual on the other that actually contains, like a list of all of the units and all of the terrains and everything. They give you good documentation. But this was developed by Human. So I don't know who the rights holder for this would be at this point. I haven't looked up who owns Human's assets. But, I mean, we got Military Madness. So maybe they just didn't want a second military strategy game. I don't know. Because there's stuff. There are genres that are not very well represented here, which is weird. So, like I said, so we got the one traditional RPG, and only if you got the Japanese unit. You've got one Falling Block game. That said, I mean, I don't know what else you would do. I know there was a PC Engine port of Hatris, but nobody wants Hatris. Tengen put out a PC Engine TurboGrafx port of Klax. There's no one-on-one fighting games. Certainly we would have had a problem with Street Fighter 2 without the 6-button controller. They could have put the first Street Fighter on there, Fighting the Street. They called it for the TurboGrafx and PC Engine for some reason. But no, that's a bad game. You don't want that. Again, I'll be covering that later. But there's like Flash Hiders, there's Martial Champion, there's Advanced Variable Geo, and there's no Final Fight clones. I mean, there was one for the TurboGrafx called Riot Zone. I knocked myself out a copy of that and played a bit of it. Like all the other games, the music didn't work right, and eventually it just started glitching to all heck. But even accounting for that, it's not a good game. It would have been like, if the Super Nintendo Mini shipped, without Final Fight and with Rival Turf, putting that on the mini console, it just would have underscored the fact that, the one game that's most like Final Fight for the system is not great. It's not good. It's barely passable. What they could have put on there, though, there is a very good port of Double Dragon 2. The thing is that these are, the Walk the Right and Punch Dudes game and the one-on-one brawler are sort of major, iconic, early 90s genres, just like the Falling Block game is. And the fact that, we at least have Panic Bomber, but, to represent that, but the fact that those other genres are so ill-represented, or not represented, is a little strange, even taking into account the fact that, this machine is renowned for the shooters, and shooters are in great, bountiful supply. Even if some shooters that I feel really should have been there are not. There are moments of missed opportunities here, is what I'm saying. There are things that really kind of should have been on there that just aren't. And that's kind of what the shape of this show going forward is going to be. What I will be doing is taking a look at 2 games per episode that are not on the mini consoles, and certainly a little bit talking about why they weren't on there, but also why they should have been, or why it's perfectly fine that they weren't. We're going to be encountering some stinkers. It's just kind of the way things go. Some of these games I've just had forever, and I'm like, yep, I still got a copy of this. Yeah. I'm probably even going to wind up buying some games that are not great, just because I've never played that before. Huh. Yeah, I remember that from the video game magazines. Well, how's that? Oh, it's not good, and I just spent $120 on it. It's a real wise investment there, guy. Yeah. Anyway, so as far as general programming notes. So that next, this Robotech thing should be a snap when I set aside some time to do it. I've sort of been talking it through for the last couple of years. And once I sort of get those thoughts all just sort of coalesced, it should basically just be a matter of setting aside the time to record it. The next TurboSaga, I will be needing to buy another piece of equipment for that, because the footage I've been shooting has been like, I directly hooked up the TurboGrafx to the computer. And because, I think I've pointed this out before, there's some video lag, which is why, I was getting my butt kicked on Spriggan, like, really hard. And I can get through couple stages of Spriggan. I was getting my butt kicked like halfway through the first stage because, you actually need to be able to react. So I'm going to get a video splitter, a video booster and splitter. Shouldn't cost me more than $20. And then I'm also, to do some of the HuCard-based PC Engine games, I'm going to actually invest in a PC Engine AV booster so I can not have that over RF and actually get it hooked up to the computer as well. So, in between, I'm probably actually going to shoot like a little mini-sode for TurboSaga, because I'm going to be getting into some of the literature that I've had forever and a day, and we can just take a look at some of the TurboGrafx magazines and catalogs I got, and that should be kind of amusing, especially considering some of the games that they claimed would be coming out that never came out. Yeah. So that's the plan going forward. As always, plans change. As always, things happen, and things don't get recorded. But I think this should be doable. It's not like this is going to require a great deal of monstrous editing like this video did, it's not going to require a whole lot of dealing with anxiety like that Robotech comic review did. So it should be good. So that's all I got to say for today. Hope you enjoyed. Do leave comments, do like, do all the things. This is your pal, Captain JLS, signing off.